So we've talked about the if keyword before to perform certain statements based on an expression that you type in brackets. I want to talk to you now about the switch statement. So let's get started on that. Now firstly, I just want to ensure that you've configured IntelliJ correctly. So go into Configure in this opening screen of IntelliJ before you've got a project open. Click on Configure, go to Project Defaults, and click on Project Structure. And you want to make sure that this override is set to 8. And that's because we're actually going to be using features that were introduced into the version 7 you can see on the screen there, but for future reference, because we are ultimately going to be using Java 8 features, we're going to set that to 8. So make sure that's set to 8 and create a new project. We're going to call it Switch. So I'm going to select the standard defaults here. We're going to call it Switch as I mentioned. Now, incidentally, if you've already created a project and you want to know how to set it so it uses that JDK8 feature that I showed you in the project defaults, I'll show you how to do that now. So go into the File menu, click on Project Structure, and you'll set that to version 8. Click on OK. Okay, so let's make a bit of space, as we always do. So the switch statement. So again, talking about this, we've seen the if statement used before. We can start off with an integer, value equals 1. You've seen something like this, if value equals double equals 1, 1, else if value equals 2, else was not 1 or 2. So you've seen a simple example there, and if we run that, in this case we should get the value 1, and we can change that to a 2 and run it again. The value on the 2, you get the value of 2, so you can see there, and of course if we specify 3 we should get neither, well sorry, was not 1 or 2. So nothing unique about that. Now this can get a little bit messy if you've got 10 values to test, or like a large number of values that you want to test and perform different code for based on that value. There is an alternative, and that's using the switch statement. So let's do something equivalent, do the equivalent to what we've done above, but using a switch statement. So we're going to put int, we'll call it switch value, and we'll set that to 1 again. Now the switch statement is comprised of the switch keyword, so it's switch, then the value that we want to test, the actual variable name or expression. So we'll put switch value, and then we put start a code block, like so. And what we do then is we then type the word case, and what we want to test for. So in this case, we want to test for the literal value 1. So I'm going to put 1, then put colon. So that's testing now for the value 1. So that's equivalent of doing if switch value equals 1. We then type in the code that we want to execute if the value is 1. So I can put value was 1, like so. We then type in the break keyword, and what break does is it terminates the enclosing switch statement and control continues at the line after the switch block. So I type break, like so. Based on that, what's going to happen is when the code is executed for 1, it's going to print out system.out.println value was 1, break, which means it's then going to come down to here and start executing any other code that we had sort of after here from this point onwards. More code here. So in other words, it would break, it would come down to here and continue processing. Now we can use multiple cases. We can put another one. We can type case 2. Value was 2. And we'll type in break again. Under that circumstance, we also want to break to that break out of the switch statement. And the final equivalent to the else statement, which is where we want to do a test for all other circumstances, we don't type else, we type another keyword, default. And default means any other case that's not been covered above, this is what I want you to do. So in that case, we would put was not 1 or 2. And then we do a final break as well. So that's the switch statement, and we can run that. And we can see here value was 1, And just to confirm it, we'll actually comment out this other code for now because we don't need the if code anymore. Just so we know that we're getting the values from the right place. Value was 1. Value was 2. We can do a test for. Value was 2. And of course, value was 3. That's good. So you can see that that's all working. So that's the switch statement. Now it's often a matter of style to choose the if statement or the switch statement because both can really achieve the same thing. You can see that we used if value equals 1. Effectively is equivalent to using a switch statement and putting case 1. The if statement is a little bit more flexible in that each time we do a test here, we don't have to use the same test criteria. So we could put if value equals 1, else if, cat equals 4. In other words, a different variable altogether. In the case of the switch statement, we're testing only the switch value here, and we're testing different values for that same value. So we can't actually then introduce a different variable type to test for argument's sake. We're just testing this one variable here in the switch statement. So switch is good to use if you're actually testing the same variable and you want to test different values for that variable. Now you can see that there would be situations where if you had 20 values to test for, this could get a little bit tedious. So there is actually a bit of a shortcut. What we can do is we can type case 3, case 4, case 5. And then we could put something like, was a 3 or a 4 or a 5. Break. So we assigned 3 to the value of switch value. Previously that was not 1 or 2, but now that shouldn't hit this default because we've added a case here for the number 3, so it should actually execute in there. So if we run that, was a 3 or a 4 or a 5. And of course, if you wanted to know what the value was, if you wanted to do some calculation in here, we could put something like, actually it was a switch value, because of course we know what the switch value is. So we could run that. So we could still actually process that. So you could have a case here for case 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. We could still do some calculation based on the actual value of switch value. The important thing is here, we're grouping multiple case tests together in the one line effectively, which makes it a lot easier. Now, one of the important things to note here is the use of the break keyword. If you don't have this break, to create a break statement, in other words, you'll get unpredictable results. And just to show you what will happen is I'm going to remove, or I'm going to comment out this break here. And if I run this, bearing in mind what happened before, we saw 2 lines of output. If we run this now can you see what's happened there? So it was a 3 or a 4 or a 5. Actually, it was a 3, was not 1 or 2. So why has that happened? Well, the reason it's happened is we've taken out this break statement. So what's happened is processing got to here based on the fact that the switch value was set to 3 in this case. So it executed those 2 lines and printed those both out. But then there wasn't a break statement, so it continued on to this line here and then eventually did a break to get out of the code. Consequently, you can see that breaks are vital to close off your case comparison, your case test, if you will. If you don't do that, the output will fall through to the next case and continue on until it finds another break, if any, or until it finishes off the switch statement. So this is a common error that you'll find in code, that forgetting to put a break, you might have everything else correct and you'll find you'll get really weird, unpredictable results, because you might be assuming in this case it's only going to execute this code, but it's moved down and executed that other code. And in a worst case scenario, see that we'll get rid of it, we'll comment out that break and that one, and we'll set the switch value to 1, run that. You can see we've got all these values. So it's process 1, process 2, process case 3, 4, and 5, and the default. So it's processed everything because there were no breaks. So make sure that you do add those breaks. It's very important. So I'll just add those back. And we'll run it again to confirm it's working again. Oops, and I undid that, so I should make that a 1 again. Value was 1, so you can see that it's now working with the break statement. Technically speaking, this last break, because it's at the end, it's the last thing that we're testing for. We could take that out. And to be precise, we can put here was not 1, 2, 3, or 5, since we're testing for those above now. That will work. oops, 3, 4 or 5. That will now work because it's the last line of the switch statement anyway, and then it will break out. So technically you don't need that one there, but it's always good to be precise in your code. So I recommend you leave that in that circumstance because it's just very clear that what you're trying to achieve, and possibly a programmer who's perhaps new or doesn't know a lot about your system might look at that and go, I wonder why I didn't add a break there. So it's just introducing a question you don't need to be introduced. So I would suggest you always add breaks anyway. So with older versions of Java, we were able to use here for this switch type, switch value, we're able to use the primitive types byte, short, char, and as you can see, I've used int here as well. Okay, so that's the switch statement. And what I'm going to do now is just set you a challenge. We'll go through that challenge and I'm just going to finish off and just show you another little scenario with the switch. I just mentioned that the switch statement can be used with 4 primitive types, byte, short, char, and int. So let's do a challenge based on that. Here's the challenge. Okay, so your test is to create a new switch statement using char primitive type instead of an int. So you need to create a new char variable and set it to some value. Then you need to create the switch statement, but this time you'll be testing for the values A, B, C, D, or E in the cases. Display a message if any of these are found, and then break, and add a default also at the end, which displays a message saying, A, B, C, D, or E was not typed. All right, go ahead and do that, and pause the video now, and when you finish, come back and you can check out my solution. Okay, how did you get on? Did you figure it out? Well, it's actually, the code is very similar to what we've got above, but we're just really changing data types. So it's really just a case of putting char, and we'll call it my char value. And let's set it to an initial value of A. So the switch statement, I mentioned that's compatible with char, so we can type char value. So that's exactly the same, but it's just specifying the char value instead of the switch value we used above, which was an int. Then the case will be case single quote A, because that's how we define a char, with single quotes, colon, and out A was found, add a break, and then we can do the same. We can put B, for example, and if we wanted to, we can also then put case C, D, E in single quotes. And we could put and we're just going to put the whatever it actually was found and print it. We're going to break. And whoops, I need to use the case keyword again, which I forgot to add there. Case, like so. And we'll put a break there. Then a default will be something like could not find A, B, C, D, or E, and break. All right, so let's give that a go. We've got the value A that we've defined, so we should get a message saying A was found. A was found, so we can change the value to B. B was found, and let's just try D, knowing that that's part of the C, D, and E test. D was found, and we can put something like a G there. Could not find A, B, C, D, or E. So that's how to use char, the primitive type char, in a switch statement. Now lastly, before we finished, in Java JDK version 7, Java version 7, they added the capability of using a switch statement with strings. And that's why at the start of the video, I wanted you to check to make sure that you'd selected the right type there, because if you haven't, you'll get an error at this point. So do refer back to the start of the video if you get an error at this point trying to get this switch statement to work. So we can also do something like switch month equals January. We can do switch month like so, and we can do a case. Break, and we'll just do one more. We won't go through all 12 months. We'll just say June, my birthday month. June abbreviated. Okay, then we'll just do a break. Default is not, we'll just put not sure. Okay, so if we run that, January report or being returned there, and we can do a search for June, or enter June I should say. We get June, and if we put something else, some random characters, not sure. Okay, so that's working, but there's a bit of a problem here. What happens if we type January? And you notice I've typed that all in lowercase. We run that, not sure. This is because technically the string January in lowercase with a lowercase j as the first letter is different to the string January with an uppercase j. And we saw this a little bit earlier on with primitive types when we're looking at ints and doubles and so forth, how there are differences. So you need to be precise here. Computers are precise, so you really need to make sure you test this correctly. So how do we get around this problem of making sure, because obviously we wouldn't want to do a case statement to put something like, case January, case January, case, January and so on. We don't want to be doing that to test for every possible scenario, every possible combination of upper and lower case letters that would type. That would be like a crazy amount of work and would really blow out the code and wouldn't be a good solution. So the way we get around that is we use the method that's included with the string called toLower. So what we do is we change our test, we put to lowercase. So I'm typing .to lowercase. You can see there's a to lowercase. If I enter that there, that's actually a method that is part of the string class. Now, I know I've talked a few times about class and said that it is coming, and it is certainly coming, but we really need to go through some of these basic points first before we start looking at classes, which is some of the more advanced features of Java. So for now, just think that to lowercase is a method that is part of Java attached to the string class, which enables us to perform some functionality. So what that to lowercase does, it just converts the entire string to lowercase. So if we enter something like January, so if we enter that and actually run this, and then we make sure that our tests, we're actually testing for the lowercase version now. And the reason we want to test for the lowercase is in this line here, we've converted it to a lowercase. So we actually said, from this point on, I want the switch statement to be whatever was typed into month, but all in lowercase. So therefore the cases are only going to work if everything's entered in lowercase. So first we'll confirm it works, and I'll just show you what would happen if we didn't do that. So you can see that January is now working, and I can put something like, really any combination of letters, it's going to convert everything to lowercase. So you can see that that's working. But if we didn't put a lowercase test here, if we run it, we'll find that that doesn't work. And that's because this has got an uppercase letter, but this test is all in lowercase. We've converted that all to lowercase. So obviously you need to make sure that you're actually testing the lowercase. So that's a method that's part of the string class as I mentioned, and we'll be talking more about that later. And it's got lots of actually different methods of string class. It's really very, very versatile. We could put to uppercase, in which case we'd have to do a test all in uppercase. So run that. You can see that it's working. So that's the switch statement. I suspect you'll use that reasonably often in your code. It's something that you'll see in a lot of Java code. It's very common to use, very versatile. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about the for statement and figure out how to provide looping capabilities for our Java code.